I am deeply sorry. I didn't mean to prolong this case for 3 years, but I also wanted to fight for my life to prove that I am not what these charges say I am. I have to live with this my entire life.
On count 2, the felony murder, you are sentenced to the Department of Corrections for a period of life.
Yeah, I'm gonna help you back.
8 days. That's all that separated Kyrie Starks from his second birthday. At 22 months old, he couldn't tell anyone what was happening to him. He couldn't call for help. He couldn't explain his fear. He couldn't speak for himself. But his voice wasn't silenced. This is the story of how justice spoke for a child who couldn't. This is the story of Kyrie Starks. Before we talk about what was taken from this world, we need to talk about who was taken. Kyrie Starks was born on February 23, 2020. By June of 2022, he was 22 months old, that magical age where toddlers are discovering everything for the first time. The age where they're learning new words every day, testing their independence, figuring out how the world works. If you've ever been around a child this age, you know, it's exhausting, yes, but it's also beautiful. Every day brings something new, a new word, a new expression, a new discovery. This is every parent's dream age, watching their child's personality emerge right before their eyes. But here's what's crucial to understand. At this age, children are completely dependent on adult protection. They can't articulate danger. They can't report abuse. They can't ask for help in ways that adults understand. This is why we exist. This is why this channel is here, to be the voice they don't have yet, to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. Kyrie Starks was one of those children, and his story is exactly why we seek justice for the voiceless. Kyrie's mother was Taylor Starks. In March of 2022, she was just 18 years old, barely more than a child herself, but working hard every day to provide for her son. She had a job at a restaurant in East Point, Michigan. The hours were long, the work was hard, but she was doing what she had to do to take care of her baby. That March, Taylor moved into an apartment complex on Little Mac Avenue in Roseville, Michigan. She was new to the area. She didn't know many people. And like millions of parents across this country, she faced a problem that so many young mothers face. She needed someone to watch her son while she was at work. Now, think about that for a moment. Young mothers, especially single mothers, are often the most vulnerable to predators. They need support. They need help. And that need can be exploited by people who sense vulnerability. But Taylor did nothing wrong. Let me repeat that. Taylor did nothing wrong. She did exactly what society tells parents to do. She found someone local, someone she could get to know, someone who seemed trustworthy, someone close by. The person she trusted seemed perfect, a neighbor, a friend, someone who lived right there in the same building. But here's something we all need to remember. Proximity doesn't equal safety. Living next door doesn't make someone trustworthy. And sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who cause the most harm. Before we continue with what happened to Kyrie, I need to pause for a moment, because what you're about to hear is difficult, but it's also crucial. If this story matters to you, if you believe children like Kyrie deserve advocates, please hit the like button right now. Subscribe to this channel, and most importantly, share this video. Every single share reaches someone who might recognize these warning signs. Every share could save a child's life. In the comments below, tell me your city and what time you're watching. This helps me understand when to publish these investigations so they reach the maximum number of people who need to see them. The more people who know these signs, the more children we can protect. This channel exists to seek justice for the voiceless. Every story I bring you about children who needed protection is not just about tragedy. It's a lesson in recognizing dangerous situations before it's too late. If you want to directly support this mission, consider leaving a super thanks or joining our channel membership. Your support allows me to continue investigating cases like Kyrie's, bringing awareness to child advocacy, and teaching others how to spot the warning signs. I encourage you to watch other videos on this channel, because knowing about cases like these could one day help you notice warning signs and protect a child who's in danger. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about Kyrie. Thank you for being part of seeking justice for the voiceless. Now, let's continue with Kyrie's story. Her name was Kimora Hodges. She was 21 years old. She lived in the same apartment building with her boyfriend. And when Taylor moved in that March, they became friends. Or at least that's what Taylor thought. Hodges seemed stable. She had a relationship. She seemed responsible. And when she offered to watch Kyrie while Taylor worked, it seemed like the answer to a prayer. For 2 months, April through June of 2022, Hodges babysat Kyrie regularly. Everything seemed fine. Taylor thought she'd found someone she could trust, someone who cared about her son the way she did. But think about this from Kyrie's perspective. He had no choice in who watched him. He was 22 months old. He couldn't tell his mother if something felt wrong. He couldn't express discomfort or fear in ways that adults would understand. Children this age depend entirely on the adults around them to read warning signs, to sense danger, to protect them. But what if there are no warning signs until it's too late? For 8 weeks, Hodges watched Kyrie without any incident that Taylor knew about. 8 weeks of seeming normalcy. 8 weeks of trust building. And then came June 13th, 2022. And everything that happened that night, everything that silenced Kyrie's voice forever, started with text messages. June 13th, 2022. It was a Monday evening. Taylor Starks left for her shift at the restaurant around 8 or 9 p.m. She dropped Kyrie off with Hodges, just like she'd done so many times before. But this time, something was different. Almost immediately, Hodges started sending frustrated text messages to Taylor. The messages revealed something deeply disturbing, escalating frustration with a toddler who was just being a toddler. Hodges called Kyrie sneaky. She told Taylor that she was too soft on him. She complained about his behavior. And then she sent a message that, in hindsight, feels like a warning sign no one could have caught in time. Think about what these texts reveal. These messages are crucial evidence of state of mind. A 22-month-old child being called sneaky by an adult caregiver. A toddler being judged for normal toddler behavior. Testing boundaries, being curious, maybe having a tantrum. This is a red flag. Frustration with normal childhood behavior is a warning sign of potential abuse. But Kyrie couldn't defend himself against these accusations. He couldn't explain that he was just being a kid. He couldn't tell anyone that the adult who was supposed to protect him was angry with him. He was voiceless. 5 hours after those messages, Hodges would send a photo that changed everything. Around 1:50 in the morning on June 14th, 5 hours after those frustrated texts, Hodges sent Taylor a photo. The image showed Kyrie with one eye closed and severe swelling around his other eye. And Hodges had a story ready. He ate soap. He was having an allergic reaction. That was the explanation. Taylor immediately rushed home from work. When she arrived at the apartment, she found her son unresponsive on the floor. He was twitching. He was seizing. He wasn't responding to her voice. Hodges called 911. Now, in this moment, Kyrie's body was speaking the truth that his voice couldn't tell. That photo, as horrifying as it was for Taylor to see, was the first evidence that something terrible had happened to her son. But it was wrapped in a lie designed to cover the truth. Taylor believed her friend. Why wouldn't she? When someone you trust tells you something, especially in a moment of panic and fear, you believe them. But doctors at the hospital would see what Kyrie couldn't say. They would speak the truth that his young voice couldn't articulate. Kyrie was rushed to Ascension St. John Hospital. Emergency room doctors immediately began examining him, and within minutes, they knew. This wasn't soap. This wasn't an allergic reaction. The medical findings were clear and devastating. Kyrie had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. He was bleeding from his ears. Doctors found a subdural hemorrhage. That's bleeding in the brain. They found bilateral retinal hemorrhages. That's bleeding in both eyes. Let me explain why that last one is so significant. Medical professionals are trained to recognize abuse, and bilateral retinal hemorrhages, bleeding in both eyes, is a key indicator of what's called abusive head trauma. You might have heard it called shaken baby syndrome. This doesn't happen from eating soap. This doesn't happen from an allergic reaction. This happens when someone violently shakes or strikes a child. Kyrie's body became the witness he couldn't be. Every injury told part of the story. Every medical finding spoke a truth that his voice couldn't tell. And here's what I want everyone watching this to understand. If a caregiver gives you one story, but medical evidence shows another, always believe the medical evidence. Always. Doctors are mandated reporters for a reason. They're trained to spot the signs of abuse. They know what injuries look like when they're accidental versus when they're inflicted. When doctors told Taylor the truth, her entire world shattered. She later said, "He had blunt force trauma to the head and he was bleeding out his ears and had to have immediate brain surgery. All I know is she threw my son into the wall and shook him up pretty bad, and they said that's just a bit of what she did to him." The betrayal was complete. The friend became the monster. The neighbor she trusted had done the unthinkable to her baby. Kyrie needed emergency brain surgery. The medical team did everything they possibly could. For 8 days, Kyrie fought. His little body fought to survive. The medical team fought to save him. His mother prayed and hoped and refused to give up. But the injuries were too severe. The damage was too extensive. On June 15, 2022, Kyrie Starks died. He was 8 days away from his second birthday, 8 days from blowing out 2 candles, 8 days from whatever celebration his mother had been planning. 22 months of life. Gone. He never got to blow out those candles. He never got to say all the words he was learning. He never got to grow up. His voice was silenced forever. But his fight for justice was just beginning. Within hours of Kyrie's death, Roseville police arrested Kimora Hodges. She was initially charged with first-degree child abuse. After Kyrie died, those charges were upgraded to felony murder. She was held on a $250,000 bond. Detective Sergeant Menas Hustulakis with the Roseville Police Department led the interrogation, and during that interview, which lasted nearly 3 hours, Hodges made statements that would become crucial to the case. The soap story, that ridiculous lie about allergic reactions, was immediately abandoned when she was questioned by police, because she knew that doctors had seen the truth. She knew that medical evidence had exposed her lies. During the interview, while sobbing, Hodges said something that would haunt this case for years. "Maybe I hit him too hard, but I didn't take my anger out on him. Maybe I hit him too hard." She admitted anger may have played a role. She showed remorse. She cried. But she also admitted what she'd done. Without Kyrie's voice, investigators had to piece together the evidence. Medical findings, text messages, witness statements, the confession, timeline reconstruction. This is how justice works for voiceless victims. When children can't speak, when toddlers can't testify, when babies can't point to their attacker, adults must do the work they cannot. Investigators had to be Kyrie's voice. They had to speak for him. They had to build a case that would demand accountability for what was done to him. But that path to justice wouldn't be easy. In fact, it would take 3 years. The case against Kimora Hodges was filed in 2022, but the trial wouldn't happen until July of 2025. 3 years. 3 years while Taylor Starks waited for justice for her son. 3 years of legal maneuvering and appeals. Hodges was represented by defense attorney Marielle Lehman, and Lehman did what defense attorneys are supposed to do. She challenged the evidence. Specifically, she challenged that confession. The argument was this. During the interrogation, Hodges had requested an attorney, but Detective Hustulakis continued questioning her anyway. The defense argued that this violated her constitutional rights, and therefore the confession should be thrown out. The case went all the way to the Michigan Court of Appeals, and on May 30th, 2024, the appeals court issued a ruling. By a vote of 2-1, the court agreed with part of the defense's argument. The final third of that 3-hour interview, potentially the most damaging portion, was suppressed. It couldn't be used at trial. The trial court's ruling by Judge Diane Druzinski was partially overturned. But, and this is crucial, the earlier portions of Hodges' statement remained admissible. That quote about hitting him too hard, that stayed in. The question became, could justice be served for Kyrie with a weakened confession? Would legal technicalities silence Kyrie's voice forever? Now, let me say something important here. Defendants have rights. That's crucial to our justice system. We don't want police violating people's constitutional protections. That's important. But victims have rights too, especially voiceless victims, especially children who can't defend themselves. The system had to balance both. It had to protect constitutional rights while also seeking truth and justice for Kyrie. The answer to whether justice could still be served would come in July 2025. Here's what the prosecution still had, even with part of the confession excluded. The medical evidence was irrefutable. You can't suppress biology, you can't suppress science. Kyrie's injuries told a story that no legal maneuvering could erase. The timeline was documented through text messages. Hodges' own words showed her growing frustration with a toddler. Her own texts revealed her state of mind. The soap story was medically impossible. No doctor, no credible medical expert, could look at bilateral retinal hemorrhages, subdural bleeding, and blunt force trauma and say, yeah, that's from eating soap. The physical evidence was consistent with abuse, not accident. The pattern of injury told its own story. This is why medical documentation matters so much for child victims. This is why forensic evidence is crucial. Kyrie's body told the truth even when his attacker tried to hide it. Science became his voice. Medicine became his advocate. The evidence spoke when he couldn't. 3 years after Kyrie's death in July of 2025, his case finally went to trial. And what happened next proved something fundamental. Truth can't be silenced. Justice can't be denied. And when enough people refuse to give up on a voiceless victim, the system can work. July 31st, 2025. 3 years and 1 month after Kyrie's death, the trial of Kimora Hodges began at the Macomb County Circuit Court in Mount Clemens, Michigan. Judge Diane M. Druzinski presided over the case. The prosecution team consisted of assistant prosecutors Mark Laws and Lisa Lozen. They had spent 3 years preparing to speak for a child who couldn't speak for himself. Defense attorney Marielle Lehman represented Hodges. The trial lasted 6 days. For 6 days, evidence was presented. Medical testimony explained Kyrie's injuries in clinical detail. Expert witnesses on abusive head trauma testified about what those injuries meant. Text messages were read in court, those frustrated texts showing Hodges' growing anger with a toddler. The photo was shown, that image of Kyrie's swollen face that Hodges sent to Taylor. The timeline was laid out, hour by hour, showing the progression from frustration to violence to cover-up. Hospital records were entered into evidence, documenting every injury, every finding, every medical intervention. And yes, portions of that confession were admitted. Maybe I hit him too hard. The jury saw it all. They saw the progression of Hodges' story, from soap to admission. They saw the medical impossibility of her lies. They saw the text messages revealing her mindset. They saw the evidence of what she'd done. The jury became Kyrie's voice. 12 people who had never met this little boy had to speak for him. They had to look at the evidence and decide, will we be his voice? Will we demand justice for this voiceless child? This is the power of the justice system when it works the way it's supposed to work for the most vulnerable among us. After 6 days of testimony, the case went to the jury for deliberation. The jury began their deliberations. They had to review all the evidence. They had to discuss what they'd heard. They had to weigh the testimony. They had to come to a unanimous decision on 2 counts, felony murder and first-degree child abuse. How long do you think it took them to see the truth that Kyrie couldn't speak? 2 hours. 2 hours. That's all it took for 12 people to see through the lies, to understand the evidence, to speak for a voiceless child. After just 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom with their verdict. Guilty. Guilty of first-degree felony murder. Guilty of first-degree child abuse. 2 hours to give voice to a child who was silenced. 2 hours to say, "We see you, Kyrie. We hear the truth your body told. We understand what was done to you. Justice is coming." Think about what that quick deliberation means. It means the evidence was overwhelming. It means the jury had no doubt. It means that despite the suppressed confession, despite the legal challenges, despite 3 years of delays, the truth prevailed. This is what justice for the voiceless looks like. When adults do their job, when police investigate thoroughly, when prosecutors fight for victims, when medical professionals document the truth, when juries deliberate with care, children get justice. Kyrie couldn't testify. He couldn't point to his attacker. He couldn't explain what happened that terrible night. But the system testified for him. The verdict was in. Justice had been served. But the most powerful voice in this case, the voice that would show us all what it truly means to honor a voiceless victim, hadn't been heard yet. And it would come from the person who lost the most. October 2nd, 2025. 2 months after the guilty verdict, the first sentencing hearing took place. Taylor Starks was now 22 years old. She'd been 18 when her son was murdered. She'd spent more than 3 years waiting for this moment, the chance to speak directly to the woman who killed her baby. She was given the opportunity to address the court, to face her son's killer, to speak her truth. And what she said shocked everyone in that courtroom. "I don't have hate in my heart for you. I honestly do wish you the best, because you're going to need it more than me. You took my son from me, but you're going to need it more than me." Think about what you just heard. Really think about it. An 18-year-old mother whose baby was murdered by someone she trusted. A young woman who had every right to express rage, hatred, and a desire for revenge. She chose grace over hatred, but she didn't stop there. Because what Taylor Starks understood, what she was about to teach all of us, is that grace doesn't mean silence. Forgiveness doesn't mean no accountability. Taylor continued, and her next words were just as powerful. "I really do wish you had accountability, or any love in your heart that you couldn't have for me and my son. Even though you might be physically free and still in jail, immensely and spiritually, you will never be right again, because you won't accept accountability for what you did." Do you understand the profound wisdom in what she just said? Grace is not the same as excusing. Forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. Taylor Starks showed us something incredible. You can let go of hate while still demanding justice. You can find peace in your heart while still insisting on accountability. You can choose not to carry the poison of hatred while still requiring that truth be told and consequences be faced. This is what it means to honor a voiceless victim with dignity. Kyrie's legacy didn't have to be defined by hatred. His mother chose to honor him with both grace and accountability. Both can exist. Both must exist. That first sentencing hearing was adjourned because Hodges' defense attorney wasn't present for the pre-sentence interview. It was rescheduled for November 4th, 2025. And on that day, Kyrie's justice would be complete. November 4th, 2025. The final sentencing hearing. Judge Diane M. Druzinski presided. Kimora Hodges, now 24 years old, stood before the court to receive her sentence. The sentence was delivered. Life in prison without the possibility of parole for the felony murder conviction. An additional 15 to 40 years for the first-degree child abuse conviction. Kimora Hodges will never be released from prison. She will never walk free again. She will die behind bars. Macomb County Prosecutor Peter J. Lucido made a statement that speaks to everything this channel stands for. The sentence handed down today reflects the severity of the crime committed. The defendant's actions resulted in the tragic death of an innocent child, and the court has imposed a life sentence without the possibility of parole to hold her fully accountable. And then he said something crucial. The justice system has a duty to protect the most vulnerable, and today's sentence underscores that duty. This is what justice for voiceless victims looks like. Life without parole for taking the life of a child who couldn't defend himself. The system spoke for Kyrie when he couldn't speak for himself. The law became his voice. The jury became his advocates. The sentence became his justice. 3 years and 5 months after his death, Kyrie Starks finally had complete justice. Kyrie Starks couldn't speak for himself. At 22 months old, he couldn't tell his mother about the danger he sensed. He couldn't report the abuse he was suffering. He couldn't testify in court about what was done to him. He was, in every sense, voiceless. But this case, his case, proves something fundamental. When children can't speak, we must speak. When toddlers can't advocate, we must advocate. When babies can't fight back, the justice system must fight for them. This is what seeking justice for the voiceless means. This is why this channel exists. And look at what happened when the system worked the way it's supposed to. Medical professionals recognized the abuse immediately. They didn't accept the lies. They documented the truth. Police investigated thoroughly. They got the confession. They preserved the evidence. Prosecutors fought for 3 years. They didn't give up when the appeals court threw out part of the confession. They kept fighting. The jury deliberated with care. They looked at the evidence. They spoke for Kyrie. The judge sentenced appropriately. Life without parole. Complete accountability. Justice was served. The system can work for voiceless victims, but only when enough people refuse to let them be forgotten. So what can we learn from Kyrie's case? What does his story teach us? How do we honor his memory by protecting other children? First, trust medical professionals. If a caregiver says one thing, but doctors say another, believe the doctors. They're trained to spot abuse. They're mandated reporters for a reason. Medical evidence doesn't lie. Second, document everything. Hodges' text messages became crucial evidence. They showed her state of mind. They established the timeline. If you use caregivers, if you co-parent, documentation matters. Third, know the warning signs of abusive head trauma, bilateral retinal hemorrhages, subdural hemorrhages, severe head injuries with explanations that don't make medical sense. Stories from caregivers that keep changing. These are red flags. Fourth, grace and accountability can coexist. Taylor Starks taught us this. You can forgive without excusing. You can find peace while demanding justice. You can honor a victim's memory without carrying hatred in your heart. Fifth, the system can work. Despite delays, despite legal challenges, despite suppressed evidence, justice prevailed because people refused to let Kyrie be forgotten. These lessons could save a child's life. They could help parents spot danger. They could give someone the courage to report suspected abuse. This is how Kyrie's voice continues to speak. Kyrie Starks will forever be 22 months old. He'll never speak the words he was learning. He'll never blow out birthday candles. He'll never grow up. He'll never experience all the things that should have been his future. But his voice echoes through this case. Every time a parent trusts their instincts about a caregiver, every time a doctor reports suspected abuse, every time a prosecutor fights for a child who can't fight back, every time a jury sees through a perpetrator's lies, every time justice is served for a vulnerable victim, Kyrie's voice is heard. If this case moved you, if you believe in seeking justice for the voiceless, here's what you can do. Learn the signs of child abuse. Know what to look for. Report suspicions. You could save a life. Support organizations that advocate for child victims. They need resources. They need people who care. Share Kyrie's story. Let his voice continue to echo. Let other parents learn from this tragedy. Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline 1-800-424453. Prevent child abuse. America, preventchildabuse.org. Report suspected abuse. Call 911 or your local authorities immediately. This is what it means to seek justice for the voiceless. Not for revenge, not for entertainment, not for clicks or views, but because children like Kyrie deserve advocates. They deserve truth tellers. They deserve people who won't forget them. Kyrie Starks. February 23, 2020, June 15, 2022. Gone far too soon. Never forgotten. His voice lives on through the justice we seek for every voiceless victim.